Aloha mai kako, o Ron Williams kia. Good morning, this is Ron Williams. We are at the King Street Catholic Cemetery in Honolulu. Today's my birthday, and where I would normally be working and doing stuff at home, thankfully good friends of mine took me out for a birthday breakfast, some time together, some storytelling, and visiting kupuna. This cemetery the Catholic cemetery holds the grave of Robert William Kahiapo Wilcox, and it also holds some of the White family, the William White family, and it holds another special woman that I know a little bit about, that I've been doing research on, that we're going to try to find today, locate her gravestone. Her name is Amalia Joy. She was a native Hawaiian woman who was a po'eloha aina, and very significant in the movement, who hardly anyone probably knows today. And we're going to try to find her grave today to honor her and to mark that grave.
That's awesome.
Well, this is the first time since I ever came to Hawaii 50 years ago that I've ever been in this cemetery, and so it's always been, I've always rode past it and saying, oh, I'd love to go inside, but it was always locked or something, and now I'm here. It's just wonderful, and the rich history, and I want to know, as many as I can, even the people that are not famous, you know what I mean, but were famous to someone or loved by someone. So yes, because one day
people like ourselves.
Yeah, one day I'm going to be pushing up Pua Lehua, so I'd like to pay my respects as well.
So she died on May 25th, 1900. Mrs. Amalia Joy, a well-known Hawaiian lady, died suddenly last evening at her residence on Liliha Street, aged 44 years. The many friends of the deceased were shocked by learning the death of Mrs. Joy, who had at no time been considered seriously ill. Mrs. Joy was the oldest daughter of the late Jacob Halk, who was also a well-known wheelwright in the early 50s in the city. When a young girl, she married Michael Joy, who left in his vocation as a whaler and had never been heard of for about 12 years, and one young son remains of the union. Mrs. Joy was a member of the choir of the Catholic Church and took a deep interest in all matters pertaining to the church, as well as to the political welfare of Hawaiians. The funeral will occur at 3 p.m. today, and will be conducted by E.A. Williams from the residence, and from the Roman Catholic Church for interment at the Catholic Cemetery. So she was married to a haole guy, a Hawaiian lady married to a haole guy, a whaler. He had a child with her and then booked. So she was a single mom who took care of all this stuff, and then she passed at 44 and she's buried here. Godfrey Rhodes was the British ambassador to Hawaii.
That's the Rhodes Scholar stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that the eugenicist or whatever.
Yeah.
I have uncles just named
Rhodes was the basis.
So he was but this tells this talks about the disconnect people from the past. This is one of the most important guys who ever visited Hawaii, and that's his daughter, and obviously no one's been here for 30 years.
There's a guava tree growing out of her for Christmas sake.
But that's not to say something bad about the family. It's just we're all disconnected from the past.
So now it's an excuse.
Super important diplomat.
Ron.
I don't know if you can do that.
Well, maybe I'll try to break it up.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Go start to take her easy.
Yeah.
Well, there are other weeds. Pull those.
Yeah, wait, sorry. I can't. I can't get the big ones that other people are. That's an
I wanted to do something that I wanted to do for a long time. There's so many. There's untold numbers of po'eloha aina that gave their lives to their nation that nobody knows about. And if you think about it, Huiloha Aina was 28,000 members, right? We know who the officers were because they're in the newspapers. But nobody writes in the newspaper about the auntie who went and visited the sick family because they needed groceries, or the auntie that took care of 4 different families' kids because they had to be out of town, the auntie that kept families together and so forth. That's not in the newspaper, so we don't know those stories. So sometimes, luckily, those voices come to us, and we're able to kind of honor those folks. And there's a woman named Amalia Joy. I love her name, Amalia Joy, and she was a member of Huiloha Aina Wahine. When the Pioklai Aina, when the political prisoners were arrested following the Wilcox Rebellion and brought to prison, it was really an attempt by the Republic to break the back of the resistance and to break down Hawaiians. They arrested all the top Hawaiians around the islands, took them away from their families. The men had lost their jobs, so how are the families being fed? And there started an organization called Ahahui Kokua Manavaleva. And it was a relief society to take care of the families of the political prisoners. And so these women got together and said, let's band together. There's 400 men in prison. Let's take care of the families to make sure they all have food, they're taken care of, and so forth. And she was one of the officers of that group. And they did fundraisers where they would go around and ask their friends and gather money and so forth. And she was the second highest fundraiser of all the women, even though there were very rich women in that group like Mrs. Campbell and so forth. So she really obviously made an intense effort to address that issue of taking care of these families. And that's as important as somebody leading a rally. She's buried here in this graveyard. I've been here a couple of times looking for her and haven't been able to find her headstone. There's a possibility that it's lost, there's a possibility that it's gone, but there's also a possibility I just didn't find it. So I thought I'd ask my friends today to help, and we would each take a corner of the graveyard and just kind of walk around. And if we find her, that's amazing, if she comes to us. If she doesn't, it gives us an opportunity to spend time with these poe in this graveyard.
Yes.
So it's just as good. The other part was to visit Robert Wilcox. Robert Wilcox for me is a perfect example. I love to use him in history examples because he's a perfect example of one of those Hawaiians who cause us to step back and really think about what we think. The natural outcome of a renaissance, of a revival of history and of a people is a reaction to push against and to create binaries. And so, of course, that's what you do. These people screwed with us, fuck them. Then along the way, you start to get a little more complex. At first we would create lists of the good guys and the bad guys. But as you start to look at their lives, they're complex. God forbid anyone go back and look at my life. Anyone who's known me in Hawaii, I'm not going to assume, but what I hear is, people would say, oh, he's a kind guy, he works hard for people, and so, but that's not who I necessarily was in Los Angeles, or that's not who I necessarily was in my 20s. So somebody that went back and looked at my life could put me on that bad guy list. So I would hope people spend time to get to know my life. And so that's what we want to do with these folks. Robert Wilcox is a great example. Lots of folks glorify him as the hero of the nation. Lots of folks vilify him as a traitor to the Queen. His life was complex. What I respect about Robert Wilcox intensely, and something you can never take away from him, is the fact that twice in Hawaiian history, the nation was at a turning point. In 1887, the Bayonet Constitution happens. Robert Wilcox comes back from school. He's recalled from school because they've cut the funds for his training. And he says, hey, what happened? And they said, well, these Howley guys got together, marched on the palace, demanded a new constitution with guns, and said, we're not taking over. And he's like, what the fuck? You guys let that happen? And he says, no. He bands together a group of men who say, we're going to undo this. And he puts his life at risk. I mean, nowadays, we get arrested, or not I get arrested, but people get arrested, and when we say, wow, and it is, you might lose your job. Remember that these folks, what we're talking about is treason. I mean, that's like today, us being arrested by the CIA on a charge of treason. We may go to jail for the rest of our lives. We may be hung and killed. Robert Wilcox took that risk and said, I'm going to bring our nation back to my people. In 89, fortunately, he had a jury that looked favorably on him and let him go. So he avoided that. But he knew what he was doing. He was putting his life at risk to fight for the country in 89. He did that again in 95. So twice in Hawaiian history, when not a lot of other people were stepping up to do it, he said, we're going to fight and bring our country back. And he didn't do it. People argue, well, he was an egotist and so forth. You don't put your life at risk to get a couple of pats on the back. I mean, if he thought if he failed he would die, and he fought in a heartbeat. So I respect the hell out of him for that. The other side of it is that he was not a royalist. You know, we mix up those terms, and I've talked a lot about the difference between a royalist and a loyalist. Loyalists were people who were loyal to the nation, regardless. Royalists were those who were loyal to the nation and the monarchy. They wanted to see the monarchy survive. A few times in Hawaiian history, Robert Wilcox argued and fought for the end of the monarchy, the beginning of a republic in Hawaii, a democracy in Hawaii that would be run by Hawaiians. Now, we can make arguments about that, we can think that's a good thing or bad thing, but that's what he thought. And he fought for that. So, and he did have headbutts with the Queen. So there are those stories. There's no doubt about his ho'okuauhao. Him and his descendants had a path to the royalty. There's no question to his courage. Again, he took up arms twice and fought for the nation. So investigating his life makes us face hard decisions, and that's why I love him as a historical figure. Yeah. You know, for me, today was just a reminder that it's not about our desires. It's not about what we want to pat ourselves on the back for. It's about us enabling history. And so she wasn't ready to be found today. It wasn't the right time. Maybe she wants us to work a little harder. Maybe it's just not the right time. I don't know. But what's supposed to happen is what happened. I'm not disappointed in the least. We spent a day today thinking about Hawaii, talking together, sharing food, visiting Wilcox, and moving further along the path of platforming her voice. So it'll happen when it's supposed to happen. I'm very happy.
That's awesome. Would you care to weigh in, anybody? Your experiences about the day.
Emily, I'm like, got my camera facing you.
So I think it's interesting when we I kind of expected that we were gonna have like an easy time and both got even she's right over here, lucky us. Amalia Joy. But I think it's interesting when it's we actually have to work for it. And I think as we were walking around, we kind of, we have our other senses telling us where we might, maybe we should be looking. But yeah, I think putting in the work makes the reward that much more meaningful, and it's a lesson that we should have to work for it, because these things matter. And yeah, so I'm glad that we have to come back.
Awesome.
Speak loud. Happy birthday, Ron. That's all I want to say. Happy birthday.
Okay. Christopher, thoughts about the
I
day?
had a wonderful time. First time I've been in this cemetery. I think I've already said it. Since the 50 or so odd years I've been in Hawaii, and it was such a privilege. And when I had a wonderful time seeing each grave and saying hello, and saying, well, I'll soon have something to share that we can share in common, because we'll both all be going on to the next adventure. So yes, I really was blessed meeting new people today.
Thank you.
Kalai o ka ua